The Department of Education hasn't put this into our curriculum, and teachers aren't teaching it.
Civics education in Florida classrooms being promoted by Governor Ron DeSantis, but maybe not all civics. Why the governor says to leave out critical race theory. What is it exactly? And why the exclusion? We explore the issue right now on Justice for All. One of the initiatives put forth by Governor DeSantis for education in Florida classrooms is a new civics curriculum. It would include bonuses for teachers who teach it, and millions of dollars in federal pandemic relief funds would go to develop the program. Digging deeper right now, Spectrum News 13's Dan Messinio recently spoke with a professor about what the governor wants to leave out when teaching civics to Florida students.
Steve Cornia teaches math to 7th graders in Seminole County. He was watching when Governor Ron DeSantis outlined his proposal for a new civics program in state classrooms.
The state of Florida has a very good civics course that focuses very strongly on the fundamentals, and all students take it.
But now DeSantis wants to double the state's efforts, outlining a civics curriculum proposal that would incorporate foundational concepts.
A high-quality education begins with a high-quality curriculum, which is why we're going to be laser focused on developing the best possible civics instruction standards.
The governor went on to say the curriculum would not include what he calls unsanctioned narrative and pointed to critical race theory.
It simply teaches people to analyze their state institutions from the perspective of race.
Dr. Eric Sma, professor of philosophy at Rollins College, says critical race theory includes thoughts about institutional racism on opposite ends of the spectrum. Some have extreme ideas and others are more in the middle.
I think it's always best for us to take on these issues with well-trained teachers and professors who can deliver the information to the students in an appropriate way.
But DeSantis says the theory has no place in Florida classrooms.
Teaching kids to hate their country and to hate each other is not worth 1 red cent of taxpayer money.
The governor's proposal calls for around $17 million of federal pandemic funds to go toward developing the new civics curriculum and just over $16 million to train educators. Cornia says the new proposal sounds like a solution in search of a problem. Florida schools already have a robust civics curriculum, leaving out critical race theory.
It's not part of the curriculum. It's not going to be part of the curriculum because, again, the Department of Education hasn't put this into our curriculum, and teachers aren't teaching it.
In Seminole County, Dan Messinio, Spectrum News 13.
The proposal includes a $3,000 bonus for teachers who would complete the civics training program. So let's take a deeper dive right now into critical race theory with our panelists today, all of them local scholars who have long studied this subject. We have 2 guests from the University of Central Florida with us. Dr. Nisette Falou is with us, a sociocultural anthropologist. Her areas of study include race and anti-racism, as well as racial capitalism. Dr. Bumi Thakur is an assistant professor in the Department of Sociology. Her areas of expertise include structural racial inequality. We have 2 guests from Rollins College, one of them that you just heard from in Dan's story, Dr. Eric Sma. He is an associate professor of philosophy and is on the board of the American Civil Liberties Union, or ACLU, of Florida. Also from Rollins College, Dr. Nolan Klein. He is an assistant professor of anthropology who specializes in race. Thank you all for being here with us today. We appreciate it. So
Thank you for having us.
First off, we know there is a lot of pushback over critical race theory. This is not new, but since the 1970s or so, it's really traced racism in America through the legacy of slavery, the civil rights movement, and most currently, even focused in on Asian American, Latino, and Indian experiences. This question for Dr. Falou, let's start with you. You have very specific training in race and social justice. So what is the value in incorporating critical race theory in Florida's classrooms?
Thank you, Tammy, for this question. It's an honor and pleasure to be here. If we think about the value, as I've gathered, of civic education for K-12 education, which is to foster and encourage our students to understand and appreciate a democratic process, a democratic society. And we do not teach them and help them understand the ways in which injustice permeates the fiber of society, right? The very institutions that not only they are part of, such as education and economic and environmental factors and the health industry in particular, as we see now with COVID, then we don't understand the value of critical race theory as something that is not a subject like math, physics, or history, but that in fact is something that permeates all facets of education and learning, including math, including such as coding and algorithms, right, and the racist processes within that, history and politics in particular. And so we should not consider critical race theory as a dilemma, as something that's antagonistic to helping our children and young population to understand that democracy is a justice issue, right? And that democracy must understand from a broader perspective than social historical points of learning that is really anchored in whiteness, right, and in patriarchy and in masculinity, but that in fact the ways in which history and politics informs democracy today is via racial relations, racial ideology. And so critical race theory is a process, right? It's not just a subject. It's a process of understanding the ways in which we are all, including our children and young adults, part of society. And in order to help them understand the very power and institutions that they are part of and will be part of as adults, understanding racism, race relations, and racial ideology is important.
Dr. DeCour, this question is for you. You have researched structural inequality. I'll ask that same question of you. What is the value?
So to echo my colleagues' comments, this understanding race is understanding America. It is fundamental to the historical origins of our country and our society, right? When we think about the sociology of race and ethnicity, we acknowledge that race itself, racial definitions, are a part of this socio-historic process, historical processes over time that are defined by social forces. The most classic example of this is the U.S. Census, which has never had consistent definitions or classifications of racial and ethnic identity. So that in itself, as a society, we don't even have a comprehensive understanding of what racial categories are, and those categories are always changing. And again, this is very much fundamental to who we are as people and how we define our identities. It's a misnomer that to be white is to not have a racial identity, because to be white is to have a particular racial identity that is situated at the top of our U.S. racial hierarchy. And so to that, this idea of understanding practice stories, understanding generational experiences, generational accesses to resource and wealth are very important, and I think are very fundamental to critical race theory as a theoretical framework.
Dr. Smile, you heard the governor say that critical race theory, in fact, teaches kids to hate their country. Do you agree?
No. I think Governor DeSantis, of course, was playing to his base when he made that statement. But I think we serve our students best when we think about this from the perspective of students. They're young, they're living in America, and what they've experienced over the last few years are shootings of Asian Americans in Atlanta, shootings of Hispanic Americans in El Paso, Texas, and a series of shootings of African American men by the police department. So they're trying to understand what they're seeing happen and play out in the United States of America. We have two choices. First, we can teach critical race theory in the classroom and have our students understand what they're seeing and experiencing in a controlled, educated environment with teachers who are well-trained, who can answer their questions competently. Or we can ignore it not teach them in a controlled environment, and we leave them vulnerable to whoever they come across on the internet. And this is when they're most susceptible to being radicalized. So I think it's a mistake for us to ignore this. If we shrink away from this opportunity, we'll cause more harm than good to our students.
Let's get Dr. Klein in here really quickly. You know, critical race theory isn't even a part of the curriculum in Florida schools, but our schools are required to teach African American history. The state's K through 20 education code lists the following among the list of subjects that are required to be taught. So let's take a look here. The history of African Americans, including the history of African peoples before the political conflicts that led to the development of slavery, the passage to America, the enslavement experience, abolition, and the contributions of African Americans to society. Instructional materials shall include the contributions of African Americans to American society. So, Dr. Klein, do you think that critical race theory should in fact be taught? We know that we're already teaching some elements of that, inequality and racism, right?
Well, I would love to see critical race theory taught in public schools, so thanks for the question. And part of that is because, to echo what my colleagues are saying, critical race theory gives us an analytical framework for understanding the impacts of racial inequality in the U.S., past and present. And then it calls for a more just and equitable society for everyone. What it does for us then is it allows for our students in K through 12 education to dig deeper and understand the root cause of the ongoing social inequalities that some of my colleagues have talked about. So I would love to see it continue to be taught, and I would say perhaps we need to advocate for it to be taught as an analytical framework in our schools.